everybody who joined this presentation. Today I will talk about the new functionality which we are delivering with the Magento 2.4.2 release called Magento Remote Storage with by default AWS S3 adapter. My name is Oleg Poseniak. I'm a software engineer in Magento. I'm an architect of this functionality, so if you have any questions regarding the functionality, regarding the availability and so on, please feel free to reach me in community, Slack, channel, or personally. So Magento itself is a very robust system. It's a big architecture, large community. And Magento natively supports a few possible storages, local file system, HTTP or FTP, but Magento natively never supported any cloud storages. And the cloud storages is some way the future for Magento, how we see it. And we would like to introduce the at least most, let's say, beneficial for us support of AWS S3 for media storage. So let's see and compare the AWS storages which they have. The AWS provides three types of storages: the S3, EFS, and EBS. So the EFS and EBS does not require any, I would say, support from Magento. It is mostly infrastructure changes. For EFS, you create a service, you attach it to your EC2 instance, and this should be working fine. EBS is pretty same. It is some way an FS system which AWS provides. So you have to do, I would say, mostly infrastructure-related changes to make it run. The S3 is different story because S3 is an API-based storage. It is key value storage. So and it requires some additional implementation from Magento side. But S3 has pretty interesting advantages comparing to AFS and EBS. S3 is generally cheaper because with S3 you pay for API requests and you do not really pay for the storage if you're in the same region. And it has very robust lifecycle control, so you can set up the different storage types. You can use Glacier or a deep archive, which will store your unneeded data much cheaper, and I would say even if you don't need it, it will be much more beneficial for you. But as said, it is application side changes because S3 is API-based file system, so you have to provide some driver to support this functionality. So we were investigating different ways how to achieve it, and of course everything should be done via the PHP SDK that AWS provides. But around the PHP SDK from AWS, there is very interesting functionality called file system, and file system is adapter, which I will talk later. But generally, we would like to have some kind of external bucket, external S3 system where you can store your media files, and it can be accessible from another external ERPs if you would like to have it. Let's compare it to the current storages. So you can see here that Magento Cloud also uses AWS, and it uses EC2 instances. And the synchronization comes in place with the GlusterFS synchronization mechanism, which synchronizes data between multiple nodes. With EFS and EBS, it will be, as I said, a bit different, but it still be inside of AWS network. And with S3, you can, as I said, you can use it with external ERPs. You can implement your different mechanism because data will be available from all over the world if you want it. So to support AWS S3, we use the file system adapter from Leak PHP. And this one is very robust. In its first iteration, the new functionality that you will see within the release of Magento 2.4.2, we added AWS S3 adapter. But Flash System itself supports many other adapters. It supports Microsoft Azure Cloud Storage. It supports Google Cloud, and also it supports DigitalOcean. So it has actually multiple of different adapters. And if your business needs anything except AWS S3, you should be pretty safe and easy to implement any other storage. But as I said, in this new release, we will add AWS S3 storage by default, so we can already test with AWS. Okay. So configuration will be relatively simple, but I would like to talk a lot about authentication because the security is very important, and we want to be very secure in this with the functionality. So we implemented the support S3 to work with private-only buckets, and that's actually de facto the standard in the industry. You should always have your bucket with private-only permissions. So nobody from out of your API requests can access the data in your bucket. Also, we support two ways of authentication. We support access key and secret key-based authentication. And also we support IAM roles. And here I would like to say that IAM roles is much better, much more secure, and much more recommended way to authenticate your bucket. So, and the only reason to not use IAM role will be some way I would say limitation on infrastructure side. But if you have ability to use IAM roles, you should always use it because it's what AWS recommends. It is also what we would like to recommend you. So by default, we provided storage for pub media and some folders inside of var directory. So the pub media contains all of your images, custom XML configuration for your themes. In this release, it will also contain sitemaps. So everything which should be stored in S3 should go to pub media and subdirectories. The var import and export is, I would say, additional functionality.
Recording is on.
We do not really like to store data from var in S3, but import-export is such, I would say, advanced functionality that we didn't really have much choice to not store it in S3. So in this release, we will support all of the import-export functionality to be stored in AWS S3 with remote storage. And also, with the remote storage support, we can introduce a very cool feature called image resizing on the edge side. So we will support 3 different ways of resize images. The old one via the get PHP, via the CLI command catalog image resize, which was always present in Magento 2. And the idea was that you manually resize images and store all of the variations in your file system. With new technologies like advanced Nginx modules, advanced fastly configuration, we have ability to not perform resizing of images before it is actually needed. And this was achieved by the additional module in Nginx, which provides image resizing on the fly. And also Fastly has very robust functionality to resize images. To achieve this, we added a new configuration to the system configuration, which allows you to provide the needed arguments for height and width within the path to your within the URL to your image. And once you configure properly in Nginx or you configure Fastly, it will resize on the fly. And the greatest advantage is that actually it will cache it properly, and it will not store it in your overflow system. It will not have any additional hidden costs because you don't really need to store them. It will be stored on edge cache size. The get PHP still default one. You don't need to perform anything additional. This is a backward compatibility item, and it will be working out of the box. For Nginx, you'll have to configure it to install an additional model for Nginx itself. And for Fastly, since Fastly works with resizing out of the box, you just need to enable configuration in your Magento system configuration. Let's look a little bit deeper. How does image resizing works with on Nginx use case? So all requests go through Nginx, and let's assume we have a request to retrieve the image. And Nginx, once it accepts this request, will check if it is in cache. If this image is not in cache, it will try to get the image from the source. Here you can actually configure Nginx to work directly with S3. So it won't go through the Magento, but it will go directly to the AWS S3 with specific identification. And at this point, Nginx also looks at the arguments that you pass within your URL request. And if it contains some height and width, it will perform resizing and will store it into the Nginx cache. And all of the another requests, consequent requests, which require the same image with the same resizing parameters, they will be taken from the Nginx cache. It's very lightweight. It's very fast solution and with proper configuration, it don't need Magento to do anything because Nginx can be configured to go directly to S3. And in this case, you even offload processing resources from your application, and it will actually dramatically also decrease the load on the application side. So the caching, there are actually a very, I would say, interesting topic around the caching mechanism. So with remote storages, there are a few types of caching. So one cache is the image itself, like file, binary file. And another type of caching is the metadata of this file. So here I would like to show how does the caching works on the edge cache with Nginx or Fastly. So request goes through the edge cache, then it goes through the Magento instance if the proxy is not configured, and then it goes to persistent cache or the remote storage. This relates to the image itself. For the metadata, metadata is kind of another piece of information that we need. And the Magento on backend, when it renders pages, when it performs some operation when you upload images to your media gallery, it performs a lot of operations to get data about the image itself. For example, it would like to show the size of the image, it would like to show the parameters like width and height. And if you're working with local file system, it's not a big deal because you have it locally and the file system operations are fast. The problems occur when you have your image on some kind of another storage, remote storage. And every call counts because, for example, to get the height and width of your image, you need to technically pull this image locally, and then with local file system methods, you need to calculate these parameters. And this is, as I said, first it's not really optimal because there are no remote storages, cloud storages, which supports possibility to provide your metadata of the image. And the second time, it's not really optimal from the API count calls because you'll have a lot of excessive similar calls, and you would have to think a lot before actually calling something to get information about the image itself. So for this purposes, we introduced one more caching mechanism, which caches the metadata of your file. And there are two options for us to store this cache. The default enabled option will be memory. It will be memory of your environment. And in this case, all of the operations with file system for particular request will be cached in the memory. And another storage is persistent cache with Redis. We support it via the Redis extension. It's very easy to configure, install, and it's really easy, but I really recommend to use the Redis cache for metadata. This was done with file system caching adapters. File system itself supports more adapters. By default, we implemented only memory and Redis, but if you feel like this is not enough, file system supports more caching mechanism like PHP Redis, which is native PHP implementation. It also supports stash and also supports memcached. So if you'd like to see anything else except memory and Redis, you should be able to extend it with your own caching mechanism. Here is most of our introduction for this functionality, and I would like to demonstrate some live examples how does interaction happens between Magento and S3 storage. And for this, I will switch to my browser. So before this demo, I created the AWS S3 bucket. It is pretty standard bucket. It has a standard storage class, nothing special. And here I would like to talk about the regions in AWS. And it's very important because currently I'm using, let me open my computer. So currently I'm using the Magento Cloud environment, which are located in Magento Cloud region US4. But actually from AWS perspective, it is US West 2 region. And this is very important because let's assume your EC2 instance located somewhere in, let's say, Ohio, or let's say, Ohio is actually a good example. And you accidentally created your S3 bucket in Dublin, Ireland. What happens? You will have to transfer all of data between two different continents. And the response time will be very, very bad because the network latency. And AWS eventually says a lot about this. You should take care about where your EC2 and S3 regions are located. And you should also pay attention that it is the same region. So it will be very, very fast, and even it will not cost you the storage. It will just count the API calls. So my cloud environment located in US4, which represents US West 2 region, and I also created the bucket in the same region, which is Oregon, US West 2. So let's go to some small example. Let's open our homepage. So here we can see that there are nothing in the home page. Let's go to the content and let's work with our media storage. So we add the support for all of the Magento functionality. We covered the CMS, catalog, whatever we could find, the B2B. So everything should be working with remote storage by default. But I just wanted to show this as the simplest example. So let's open the source. And this already working with S3. So Magento is able to read the three of your folders in S3 bucket, and it also can show you what inside of this bucket. So if you go to our bucket, we can see that we have a media folder, and then let's go to the vSwitch, and we can see there is this one image present. So let's add one more. I like to use cat for some reason. So we uploaded the image. Let's go back to the S3 bucket. And you can see that this image is being instantly uploaded to the bucket. You can see type, you can see the date, which is now. You can see the size and the storage class. And that's what I previously told, the storage class can be optimized. So if you see, and it actually has very intelligent storage class optimization. S3 can detect which images does not be required a lot, and it actually can change the storage class, and it will cost you much less. So let's go to the image. So if you open the object URL, you will see that access denied. This is because, as I said in the beginning, the bucket must be private. You should not have any public access to your files. And by default, S3 will show you access denied error. Let's see a little bit more deeper. And let's see the metadata. So the metadata is very important for us. As I said previously, Magento runs a lot of file system operations, which are just trying to define what is the content type, what is the size of this file, what is the image resolution, if it's image, and so on. And for example, for images, we can store our parameter for width and height in the S3 metadata storage. And anytime when we have this file and Magento tries to get this data, we can use not the file itself, but we can use very lightweight API call and get this width and height directly from metadata storage. And this, I would say, it's much more efficient than downloading image locally and then trying to determine what is the parameter of this file. So otherwise, it is simple file for S3, nothing really specific. It has a key, type, size, and so on. But from Magento perspective, if you open this file, for example, in our new tab, we can see that Magento technically also does not ever show where the file is located. It goes through the get.php file, resolver, and then for Magento it's always pretty same. So it shows the Magento URL. Actually, everything is very generic. So let's add this file to our page. Let's see some parameters. So we have our get here. Let's go to the front end. Let's save the page. Go to the front end. Hopefully I don't need to clean cache. Yeah, and here we can see the image is here. And here I would like to say about the caching on front end, since it's very important. So this is my cloud environment. I'm using the default option to cache the images in the file system, and they've been resolved through the get.php file. But in the case when you configure advanced caching, when you set up fastly or you will enable Nginx, it should be stored always on the front, on the edge cache side. Do not store the file locally. And this is very important if you do not have, if you have multi-node environment and you do not have any synchronization between those environments in place. You have detached instances, and you would like you will have to in some way to synchronize these files, and for this you will use S3 storage, and it will be cached on front end to not run the same API calls on different nodes. This is mostly all for the demo. As I said, and let's a little bit talk about the configuration itself. So as I said in the beginning, the configuration is simple. I would say it's very simple. So we added few new options to the setup config set. Let's have a look at this option. We added a few new options to the setup config set and to both setup install commands, which allow you to configure the storage configuration during install and during, I would say, post-install process. Probably my cache was. And you can pass this configuration to the init.php file. Of course, you can do it manually, but we definitely recommend to do it via the CLI because it has some validation in place. So it has a remote storage driver. As I said, by default, we support AWS S3. But if you wish to add any other drivers, you should be able to do it. We also need prefix, and prefix is something that came from the file system library. And the idea is actually that you can use the same bucket, but you will store the data in the subfolders. Let me show it how does it look like. So I have some bucket, and for example, all of these files, they are located in the root of my bucket. But once I specify the prefix in the configuration, all files will go into the subfolder of this bucket. And it doesn't really have a lot of use cases for production, but for testing purposes, when you don't want to have a new bucket for all the environments, it's pretty interesting feature to have. We also require to have some configuration for the bucket. We require the name of the bucket and the region. And these parameters are being passed to the AWS SDK. Also, in my case, I am authenticating via the IAM roles, but as I said, we support also key secret values. So if you don't have a possibility to use IAM roles, we support key and secret to pass to your S3 bucket. The another thing is cache. So for cache, cache locates as part of the remote storage configuration. So we require you to pass adapter, which can be pRedis or memory. And in case with pRedis, we will need the access, the configuration to access this Redis instance. We will need scheme, host, and the port to access the Redis storage. And once it's set up, It will go all through S3, and you should not really experience any difference between your local file system and the S3 storage, since we will take care of the caching and proper communication between Magento and S3. This is all for the demo. I think we have some time for the questions. So please unmute yourself if you have any questions, we can discuss them.
We have question from the Alex in the chat.
If I will add it to S3 directly, it also will be displayed in media gallery, right? Yeah, and probably we have some time so I can demonstrate it. Yeah, that's correct. We added support to the media gallery as well, but for those who are not aware, media gallery use more, let's say, correct mechanism for file storage. It also uses database to store the data. So let's go to the configuration and enable the new media gallery. Probably it's system enable gallery. Yes. So let's enable new media gallery and see how this works. So yeah, let's back to our home page. And let's try to use media gallery. So here is actually new media gallery, and you can see that I have some images here, but because I was experimenting, I was testing it, but technically everything should work fine. You should be able to perform all of the standard operations, creating folders, uploading files, and so on. So the only difference between new media gallery and the old media gallery is that it also stores the data in database. The data about your files in database. So yes. But everything else should be fine. So the question is if it is available for cloud customers. Nothing actually prevents you from configuring S3 storage for cloud customers. But first of all, we currently do not create automatically buckets, so you will have to do it manually. And the second thing is we're still working on the correct caching on front-end size for the cloud. Since currently cloud configuration for Nginx a little bit limited, and you will have to use Fastly. So we're still finalizing these details, but once it will be officially supported in Magento Cloud, we will let you know. Probably the only last thing that I wanted to show is with the patch release 2.4.2, we had to make small change, which was coded by community, but I would like to get a little bit deeper on this. So previously, Magento had had configuration for Apache and Nginx, it still has, but I would like to show the difference. So all of the Magento requests are going through the index.php files. And previously we had two of those index.php files. One was in the root folder and one is in the pub folder. And technically the reason why we had the index.php file in the root directory was for Apache to work for this. But it led to a bunch of different errors when we were not able to recognize what is the real root folder of your application. And for this, we had to remove the root index.php file, and we changed the default Apache HTSS file to work in the same way how does the Nginx works. And if you remember the Nginx configuration, it always goes through the pub. And we did the same change for the Apache. And in this new release, all the requests will go through the index.php file, which is located in the pub directory. As I said, this solves a lot of problems which we encountered, and it also should make it much more easy for you to work with file system, since you will always be sure that everything is located inside of the pub folder.
Okay, guys, if there is no questions, yeah, well, go on.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining this demo. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and we will post the recording on YouTube, so you always can share it and review it again. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach me out, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions after the demo. Thank you, and have a great Friday and weekend.
Okay, thank you, Oleg, for such a great presentation and demo. Thank you guys for attending. So, yeah, see you soon.
Yeah, bye.
Bye, guys.